Imagine a childhood stolen, innocence locked away in the damp darkness of a backyard shed. For 10-year-old Leo, this was his horrifying reality. A prisoner in his own supposed sanctuary, forgotten by the world, his spirit slowly fading. Day after day, hope dwindled, until an unexpected knock shattered the silence. A wealthy stranger, driven by a gut feeling that something was terribly wrong, stood at the door, his voice a resonant command against unspeakable cruelty. No one does this to a child. What happens when one man's courage confronts unimaginable darkness? Prepare for a story of heartbreak, resilience, and the powerful fight for one boy's stolen life. The air in the shed hung thick and damp, a palpable thing Leo breathed in with every shallow gasp. It smelled of mildew, rotting wood, and the faint, acrid tang of mouse droppings, a perfume of neglect he'd unwillingly grown accustomed to. Sunlight, or what passed for it, was a miserly guest, seeping through a single, grime-caked window pane, high on one wall, and whatever cracks the warped planks offered. It painted dusty, ephemeral stripes on the packed earth floor, illuminating nothing but the misery of his small, 10-year-old world. He sat on an overturned bucket, his bony knees drawn to his chest, the rough fabric of his too thin t-shirt scraping against his skin. This was home now. A prison, more like. It hadn't always been this way. Sometimes, when the gnawing hunger in his belly wasn't too loud, or the chill seeping from the ground didn't make his teeth chatter, Leo would close his eyes and drift back to a time of warmth, of laughter that bounced off sunlit kitchen walls, of arms that held him tight and smelled of cinnamon and something uniquely Mom. He remembered Dad's booming laugh, the scratch of his 5 o'clock shadow when he nuzzled Leo's neck, the way he'd swing him high. So high, Leo felt he could touch the puffy white clouds. Their house, a cozy blue clapboard with a porch swing and a yard full of Mom's unruly roses, had been a haven. Meals were noisy, loving affairs, story times were adventures, and bedtime prayers were whispered promises of a safe and happy tomorrow. Then the tomorrows had shattered. He didn't understand much about the accident, just the hushed, urgent phone calls, the wail of sirens that seemed to echo in his dreams for weeks. And then, the terrible, crushing silence. Aunt Carol, Dad's younger sister, had appeared like a figure emerging from a fog. Her face, usually set in a pinched expression he'd glimpsed at obligatory holiday gatherings, was artfully arranged into lines of sorrow. Her voice, normally sharp and quick, was now a low, sympathetic murmur. "Oh, my poor, poor boy," she'd cooed, pulling him into an embrace that felt stiff and unfamiliar. Her perfume was cloying, sweet and heavy, unlike Mom's light floral scent. "You'll come live with me, of course. We'll take care of each other. It's what your father would have wanted." In the blur of grief and confusion, Leo had clung to those words. Aunt Carol was family. She had to be safe. She had to be kind. The lawyer's office had been another bewildering experience. Men in dark suits spoke in hushed tones, using words like estate, beneficiary, and guardianship. Aunt Carol had dabbed at her eyes with a lace-trimmed handkerchief, her voice trembling slightly as she assured everyone present that Leo's well-being was her sole priority. Everything John and Mary built, everything they saved, "It will all be for Leo's future," she'd declared, a righteous sorrow in her tone. "I'll ensure he has everything he needs, every opportunity they dreamed of for him." Leo, small and lost in an oversized armchair, had only understood that Aunt Carol was now in charge. And for a little while, it seemed she meant what she said. The first few weeks in her neat, obsessively tidy house, so different from the comfortable clutter of his own home, were tolerable. She bought him new clothes, a few cheap toys, and even made his favorite meal once, macaroni and cheese, though it tasted bland and unfamiliar compared to Mom's. but Leo couldn't shake the feeling of being an exhibit, a testament to her supposed generosity. When her friends came over, Carol would parade him out. "This is Leo, my brave little man," she'd say, her voice dripping with a sweetness that made his teeth ache. "We're managing, aren't we, sweetie? It's a big adjustment for both of us." The shift was subtle at first. Once the papers were signed, the bank accounts consolidated, and the calls from concerned school counselors and distant relatives dwindled. The saccharine facade began to crack. Carol's smiles became rarer, her tone sharper. The new toys were put away for safekeeping and never reappeared. The special meals ceased. Instead, Leo often found himself eating leftovers or a hastily made sandwich, usually alone in the kitchen while Carol watched her television programs in the living room, the volume turned up high. "You need to learn to be more independent, Leo," she'd snap if he asked for help or company. "Life isn't all fun and games. Your parents, well, they spoiled you." The mention of his parents, once spoken with feigned reverence, now carried a hint of resentment. He started to notice her new clothes, the expensive-looking handbag she brought home one afternoon, the way she'd hum while browse catalogues for things he knew his parents could never have afforded. The inheritance his parents' legacy meant for his future was becoming Carol's present. Then came the day she stood in the doorway of his small guest room, her arms crossed, a look of strained patience on her face. "Leo, honey," she began, the endearment sounding like a warning. "The house needs some extensive repairs. We're a bit cramped as it is. I was thinking, the shed out back. It's quite sturdy. With a little fixing up, it could be your own special clubhouse. A place just for you." A clubhouse? He knew, with a cold dread that settled deep in his stomach, that this was no offer of a playful den. He looked at her, trying to find a flicker of the kindness she'd shown in those first few days, but her eyes were hard, like polished stones. "It'll be an adventure," she'd said, not meeting his gaze. The fixing up had consisted of Carol tossing an old moth-eaten mattress onto the dirt floor and handing him a thin blanket. The adventure was this, a slow descent into a life of cold, hunger, and a loneliness so profound it felt like a physical ache. The gilded promises had tarnished, revealing the bitter, cruel truth of Aunt Carol's heart, and Leo, a 10-year-old boy who had already lost everything, was now her prisoner, tucked away where the world couldn't see, and his future was being stolen, one chilling day at a time. Days in the shed bled into one another, marked only by the meager offerings of light and the irregular thud of a plate set down just inside the door, Aunt Carol's perfunctory deliveries. Leo learned to measure time by the rumbles in his stomach and the slow crawl of shadows across the grimy floor. Loneliness, a constant companion, pressed in on him. But Leo, in the resilient way of children, began to carve out a fragile existence within his prison's four walls. His treasures were few, scavenged from the shed's forgotten corners. There was Sir Reginald, a brave, one-legged plastic soldier, green and stoic, who became the valiant protector of their makeshift kingdom. A chipped teacup, its floral pattern faded, but still visible, became the royal chalice, sometimes holding a few precious drops of rainwater Leo collected when the roof leaked. His most cherished find was a tattered copy of Treasure Island, its pages yellowed and some missing, discovered stuffed between two loose floorboards. He couldn't read all the words, but the illustrations of pirates, ships, and faraway islands fueled his imagination, offering fleeting voyages beyond the shed's oppressive confines. He'd whisper his stories to Sir Reginald, elaborate tales of daring escapes and hidden riches. Sometimes, a fat brown spider that spun intricate webs in the corner became Charlotte, a wise and silent confidant. He'd tell her about his parents, his voice barely above a breath, the memories like fragile glass. Mum used to sing, he'd confide to the still arachnid, tracing patterns in the dust. She had a voice like sunshine, talking about them hurt, a deep, satisfying ache that reminded him they were real, that the love had been real. The shed had one small, dirt-streaked window, too high for him to see out of clearly unless he precariously balanced on the overturned bucket. From this precarious perch, he could snatch glimpses of the world he was no longer part of. He'd see the Henderson kids from next door, their laughter carrying on the breeze as they chased each other across their green lawn, their brightly colored bikes glinting in the sun. Sometimes, the tantalizing jingle of the ice cream truck would drift down the street, a sound that made his mouth water and his heart ache with a longing so sharp it felt like a physical blow. At night, the warm yellow glow from other houses seemed to mock his own cold, dark reality. Each flicker of life outside was a fresh stab of what he'd lost, what Aunt Carol had stolen. Once, an elderly woman he vaguely recognized as Mrs. Peterson, who lived across the street, paused while walking her small, yappy dog. She'd stood for a long moment, her head tilted, looking towards Carol's backyard, specifically towards the shed. Leo held his breath, hidden behind the grimy pane. Had she heard something? Seen a flicker of movement? Her dog barked once, a sharp, inquisitive sound. Then, Mrs. Peterson shrugged, tugged gently on the leash, and continued her slow amble down the sidewalk. The moment passed, a tiny bubble of hope bursting silently, leaving Leo with an even heavier sense of invisibility. No one knew. No one was coming. Aunt Carol's visits were infrequent and dreaded. They usually meant a new list of chores. Since you're not doing anything useful in there, you might as well make yourself earn your keep, or a fresh tirade about his supposed ingratitude. "Do you have any idea how much I've sacrificed for you, boy?" She'd screech, her voice a rasp that scraped at his nerves. She never stepped more than a foot inside, as if the shed's squalor might contaminate her. Other children would be grateful for a roof over their heads, any roof, but you just mope, ungrateful, just like your father sometimes, always expecting handouts. The food she provided grew more meager. A stale piece of bread, a bruised apple, sometimes just a bowl of watery soup that did little to ward off the persistent hunger. If he ever dared to ask for more or complain about the cold, her eyes would narrow into slits of pure malice. "You're lucky to get what you get," she'd hiss. "Don't push me, Leo. You really don't want to see what happens when I'm pushed." One particularly cold evening, after a day where his only meal had been half a cold, greasy hot dog, Leo found himself shivering uncontrollably, despite being huddled under his thin blanket. He heard Aunt Carol in the main house, laughing at something on the television. The sound was so normal, so carefree, it felt like a deliberate act of cruelty. He pictured her in the warm, brightly lit living room, perhaps with a hot drink, while he was slowly freezing, forgotten. Fear, a cold, slimy creature, began to coil tighter in his gut. It wasn't just the hunger or the cold anymore. It was the dawning, terrifying realization of his utter helplessness, of Aunt Carol's boundless capacity for cruelty. He was small, and she was big. He was alone, and she held all the power. He clutched Sir Reginald tight, the plastic soldier's sharp edges digging into his palm. "We'll be okay," he whispered into the darkness, more to convince himself than his inanimate friend. "We just have to be brave, like a pirate finding a secret cove." But the whispers in the dust offered little comfort against the chilling reality of his aunt's growing tyranny and the vast, echoing emptiness of his stolen childhood. The dust, it seemed, was all he had left. Aunt Carol was a master of the carefully constructed lie, a weaver of narratives that painted her as a long-suffering saint, and Leo as anything from a sensitive child needing quiet to a troubled boy prone to tantrums. The inheritance his parents had painstakingly saved The money meant to pave his path to college, to a secure future, was now the fuel for Carol's increasingly comfortable life, a secret joy she indulged while Leo languished. He'd hear her on the phone sometimes, her voice syrupy, sweet, a stark contrast to the venom she directed at him. "Oh yes, Mrs. Gable, Leo's adjusting," she'd say, loud enough for him to hear through the thin shed walls if the wind was right. "It's a process, you know. He misses his parents terribly. We're thinking of sending him to a special boarding school next year, one that can cater to his particular needs." A boarding school. The lie was so audacious, so far removed from his cold, dirt-floored reality, that it almost made him laugh, a dry, humorless sound that died in his throat. The new sofa that appeared in Carol's living room, a plush, cream-colored monstrosity he only glimpsed when she occasionally left the back door ajar, certainly hadn't been paid for by her meager part-time job at the local library. Nor had the new landscaping in the front yard, vibrant flower beds that mocked the barren patch surrounding his shed, or the increasingly frequent shopping bags from department stores she'd quickly whisk into her bedroom. Each new acquisition was another brick in the wall, separating him from his stolen future, another testament to her callous greed. There were moments, however, when the carefully constructed facade threatened to crumble. One Saturday morning, a uniformed police officer knocked on the front door. Leo, peeking through a knothole in the shed's planking, felt a wild surge of hope. Had someone reported her? Was this it? Aunt Carol answered, her face a mask of polite surprise. "Officer, is something wrong?" "Ma'am, we had a call about a possible prowler in the neighborhood last night. Just doing routine checks. Everyone accounted for in your household?" Leo saw Carol's hand flutter to her throat. "Oh, my. Yes, officer. Just myself and my nephew, Leo. He's a bit under the weather today, staying in his room." She gestured vaguely towards the main house. "Poor thing, picks up every bug." The officer nodded, his gaze sweeping the yard, lingering for a heart-stopping moment on the dilapidated shed. Leo pressed himself flat against the wood, terrified of making a sound, yet desperately wishing he could scream. "All right, ma'am. Just let us know if you see anything suspicious." "Of course, officer. Thank you for your diligence." Her smile was bright, convincing. The door closed, and the surge of hope in Leo's chest deflated like a pricked balloon. She was too good at this, too practiced. Another time, a woman from Child Protective Services made an unannounced visit. Carol, flustered for a rare moment, intercepted her on the porch. Leo, who had been tasked with weeding the small, scraggly vegetable patch near the shed, a patch whose meager produce he rarely tasted, froze. The woman's voice was kind but firm. "We received an anonymous tip, Ms. Albright, concerning your nephew's welfare." Carol's recovery was swift. "An anonymous tip?" she scoffed, a wounded indignation in her voice. "Probably that busybody Mrs. Henderson. She's always had it in for me. Leo is perfectly fine. A little withdrawn, perhaps, given all he's been through. Would you like to see his room? I just had it redecorated." She didn't wait for an answer, already leading the woman into the main house, a whirlwind of plausible explanations and aggrieved sighs. Leo knew the redecorated room was his old guest room, now likely pristine and unused, a stage prop for Carol's performance. The CPS worker left 20 minutes later, apparently satisfied, or at least outmaneuvered. Each close call left Carol more irritable, her paranoia sharpening her cruelty. "If you ever say a word to anyone about our arrangement," she'd hiss, her face close to his, her breath smelling faintly of the cheap wine she'd started drinking in the evenings, "I'll make you regret the day you were born. Do you understand me, Leo?" He understood. The fear was a constant companion now, a cold knot in his stomach, that tightened with every passing day. His physical state mirrored his despair. The meager, inconsistent meals left him perpetually weak, his clothes hanging loosely on his thinning frame. A persistent cough had settled in his chest, a dry, racking sound that echoed in the shed's confines, especially at night. His hair was lank and dull, his skin pale and smudged with grime that the occasional cold water splash from the outside spigot couldn't fully erase. He tried to keep himself clean, to maintain some semblance of the boy his parents had raised, but the effort was becoming monumental. The contrast between his existence and the life Aunt Carol was curating for herself with his parents' money was a chasm of injustice. He was living in squalor, slowly fading, while she bought new trinkets and entertained friends in the warm, well-fed glow of the main house. His future, the education, the opportunities, the very life his parents had envisioned for him, was being devoured by her selfishness, one secret, stolen dollar at a time. The weight of those secrets, Carol's and his own forced silence, was crushing him. The neighborhood on Sycamore Street was quiet, settled. Houses were mostly well kept, lawns mowed, the kind of place where people waved from their porches, but largely kept to themselves. It was into this suburban tableau that Arthur Harrison arrived, not as a new resident, but as a man considering a local business investment that required him to survey the area periodically over several weeks. He was a man of keen observation, a habit honed by years in competitive business, and it was this attentiveness that first drew his eye to the slightly off-kilter property halfway down the block, number 217, Carol Albright's residence. It wasn't overtly derelict, not like some houses he'd seen in his time. The front yard, as Leo had noticed, was newly, if somewhat garishly, landscaped. But there was an air of curated neglect about the place. The curtains in the main house were often drawn, even on bright sunny days, lending it a secretive, shuttered feel. And then there was the shed. From his car, parked discreetly down the street during one of his observational drives, Mr. Harrison noted the shed repeatedly. It was an anomaly. Most sheds in the neighborhood were tidy affairs, housing lawnmowers and gardening tools, perhaps a bicycle or two. This one, set far back in the yard, looked dilapidated, almost forgotten, its paint peeling, one side visibly sagging. Yet, he'd occasionally see the woman who lived there, Ms. Albright, approach it, her movements quick, almost furtive, before she'd retreat back into the main house. It was an odd focal point for such brief, almost reluctant attention. One late afternoon, as dusk was beginning to settle, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Mr. Harrison was making a slow pass. He saw Ms. Albright emerge from her back door, carry a small plate towards the shed, leave it just inside the doorway without entering, and then hurry back. It was the furtiveness of the action, the almost dismissive way the plate was delivered, that struck him as peculiar. It wasn't the behavior of someone storing tools or old furniture. Inside the shed, Leo had been dozing fitfully, the gnawing hunger a dull ache. The familiar scrape of the door opening a few inches and the clink of the plate brought him to a low level of awareness. He didn't move until he heard Aunt Carol's footsteps retreat. Only then did he crawl towards his meager offering. Tonight, 2 slices of white bread and a small wilted carrot. As he ate, his gaze drifted to the grimy window. For a fleeting second, through the streaks of dirt, he saw a dark, unfamiliar car idling down the street. A man was inside, looking not directly at the shed, but in its general direction. Leo's heart gave a strange little flutter, a confusing mix of fear and something else he couldn't name. A stranger. Strangers were usually bad news, a potential threat to his precarious, hidden existence. But this one, there was something about the stillness of the car, the way the man just sat there, observing, That was different. Then the car moved on, and Leo dismissed it, the gnawing in his stomach a more immediate concern. A few days later, Mr. Harrison found himself walking the neighborhood on foot, assessing pedestrian traffic for his potential business. As he passed number 217, he heard it, a sound so faint he almost missed it, easily dismissed as the wind or a stray cat. It was a cough, a dry, racking little sound, unmistakably human, and it seemed to emanate from the direction of that dilapidated shed. He paused, listening intently. Silence. He told himself he must have imagined it. Ms. Albright lived alone, didn't she? That was the impression the other neighbors, when he'd made subtle inquiries about the area, had given him. Carol Albright. Oh, she keeps to herself mostly. Lives there with her nephew, I think, though no one's seen much of the boy lately. Poor thing. Lost his parents, you know. The nephew, the boy no one had seen much of lately. The shed. The following week, Mr. Harrison was again in his car, a file of zoning regulations on the passenger seat, when he saw something that made him sit bolt upright. A small, pale hand, smudged with dirt, appeared for a mere instant in a narrow gap between two warped planks of the shed wall, reaching out as if to feel the air, before quickly retracting. It was a child's hand. There was no mistaking it. A cold dread, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through Arthur Harrison's professional detachment. The drawn curtains, the furtive trips to the shed, the cough, the boy no one saw, and now a child's hand reaching out from that wretched structure. These weren't just quirks of a reclusive woman, these were pieces of a puzzle, and the picture they were forming was deeply disturbing. He didn't know what was happening at 217 Sycamore Street, not yet, but a seed of profound unease had taken root. The faint knock of suspicion had grown into a persistent thrum of concern. He found himself driving by more often, his observations no longer casual, but focused, his mind racing through possibilities, each one more unsettling than the last. Someone, it seemed, needed help. And the thought that it might be a child, trapped and hidden away, began to weigh heavily on his conscience. The distant hope Leo hadn't even dared to fully form was, unknowingly, beginning to find a potential anchor. Arthur Harrison was not a man to let a troubling puzzle lie unsolved, especially one that whispered of a child's suffering. The image of that small, dirt-stained hand reaching from the shed had etched itself into his mind. His business assessments in Sycamore Street became secondary. His primary focus was now number 217, and the secrets it held. He began his inquiries with more purpose, though always with an air of casual, neighborly interest. He struck up a conversation with old Mr. Henderson, who was out painstakingly trimming his hedges. Thinking of buying in the area, Mr. Harrison offered by way of explanation. Quiet street, seems like a good community. Mostly, Mr. Henderson grunted, snipping precisely at a stray twig. Folks keep to themselves. That Albright woman over there, he gestured with his shears towards Carol's house. Odd bird, always has been. Lives with her nephew, or so I hear. Haven't laid eyes on the boy in months, though. Used to see him in the yard when his parents were alive. Good people they were. Shame about them. A nephew? Mr. Harrison prompted gently. Does he go to the local school? Mr. Henderson shrugged. Couldn't say. Like I said, odd bird, that Carol. He gleaned little more from other brief conversations. People knew of Carol and the tragedy that had brought her nephew into her care, but no one seemed to know much about them. It was the kind of polite, suburban blindness that allowed secrets to fester. His observations of the house itself became more frequent. He'd park at different vantage points, noting Carol's comings and goings. He saw her carry groceries into the main house, but the deliveries to the shed remained sparse, always that single, hastily delivered plate. He never saw anyone else enter or leave the shed. He never saw a light in its grimy window after dark. One afternoon, Steeling himself, Mr. Harrison walked directly up Carol Albright's driveway just as she was retrieving her mail. He offered his most disarming smile. "Excuse me, Miss Albright." Carol turned. Her eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, narrowed slightly. "Yes?" "Arthur Harrison. I'm looking at some commercial properties nearby, and I couldn't help but admire your unique garden shed." He gestured vaguely. "Quite the rustic charm. Do you use it for storage, or perhaps a workshop?" Carol's lips thinned. A flicker of something, annoyance, suspicion, crossed her face before being smoothed away. "It's just an old outbuilding, full of junk mostly. I keep meaning to have it torn down." Her voice was brittle. "Ah, I see," Mr. Harrison said, his gaze lingering on the shed for a fraction of a second too long. "Well, lovely to meet you." "You too," she replied, the words clipped, already turning back towards her front door, a clear dismissal. The brief interaction confirmed his suspicions. Her defensiveness was palpable. She was hiding something, and it was almost certainly in that shed. Meanwhile, inside the shed, Leo's world had become a heightened state of desperate awareness. He'd seen the dark car more frequently, the man with the kind, worried face watching. He didn't understand it, but a sliver of impossible hope, fragile as a butterfly's wing, had begun to beat within his chest. Could this man? Could he help? Driven by a surge of desperation that momentarily overrode his ingrained fear, Leo decided to take a terrible risk. He had one treasure he'd kept hidden even from Sir Reginald, a small, brightly colored marble, a vibrant swirl of blue and yellow, a relic from his old life. One afternoon, when he heard Aunt Carol's car pull away from the house, he scurried to the crack in the wall he knew faced the street. His heart hammered against his ribs. Peeking out, he saw the man's car parked further down. With trembling fingers, Leo pushed the marble through the crack. It landed softly in the overgrown grass just outside the shed wall, a tiny, almost invisible speck of color against the drabness. It was a foolish gesture, a child's desperate message in a bottle, but it was all he had. Carol, for her part, was not oblivious. She'd noticed the unfamiliar car, the man who seemed to be paying too much attention to her property. Her natural paranoia, always simmering beneath the surface, began to boil. She became more watchful, her temper even shorter. "What have you been doing in here, huh?" she snarled at Leo one evening, her eyes scanning the shed's interior with suspicion. "Talking to someone. Trying to get attention." Leo shook his head, cowering. No, Aunt Carol. "You better not be," she warned, her voice dangerously low. She grabbed his arm, her fingers digging into his thin bicep like talons. "If I find out you've been making trouble for me, Leo, you'll wish you'd never been born. I can make things much, much worse for you. Don't you ever forget that." Her threats now carried a new weight, a chilling intensity that terrified him. The storm was gathering, not just in Mr. Harrison's growing determination, but in Aunt Carol's escalating fear of exposure. Leo was caught in the middle, his small, desperate hope battling against a tidal wave of fear. He could only pray that his tiny marble, his silent plea, had somehow, against all odds, been seen. Arthur Harrison sat in his quiet hotel room, the glow of the city lights a distant, indifferent backdrop. The file on his desk, ostensibly detailing market demographics for his business venture, lay untouched. His thoughts were consumed by a far more pressing matter: the boy in the shed on Sycamore Street. He'd seen the small, bright marble nestled in the grass near the shed's grimy foundation during his last pass that afternoon, a tiny, almost insignificant splash of color against the desolation. Yet it felt like a shout, a desperate signal flare, a child's last, hopeless plea. He had replayed every observation, every overheard snippet, every gut feeling. the furtive trips Carol Albright made to the shed, the boy's almost spectral absence from any normal childhood activity, the fleeting glimpse of that small hand, the nearly invisible marble. It all painted a grim, undeniable picture. He could call Child Protective Services anonymously, of course. That was the sensible, detached route. But what if they were slow to act? What if Carol, with her practiced deceptions, managed to fool them again, to hide Leo, or explain away the situation before they could intervene effectively? The thought of that child enduring even one more day, one more night, in that hovel under that woman's cruel dominion, was intolerable. Number tomorrow morning, he would go there himself. He would knock on Carol Albright's door, and he would not leave until he saw the boy, until he knew the truth. If the situation was as dire as he suspected, he would call the police from her doorstep. It was a risk. She could accuse him of trespassing, of harassment. But the potential cost of inaction was far, far greater. His decision made, a heavy sort of calm settled over him, the grim resolve of a man about to walk into a storm. For Leo, that night was an eternity of cold, and a despair so profound it felt like a physical weight pressing down on his small chest, making each breath a labored effort. Earlier that evening, Carol had been in a particularly foul mood. Perhaps her wine hadn't been to her liking, or a bill had arrived that her pilfered funds couldn't quite cover. She had stormed out to the shed, not with food, but with fury. A small stack of old newspapers Leo had been using to try and insulate a corner against the drafts had displeased her. "What is this mess?" she'd shrieked, her voice cracking. "Are you trying to burn the place down, you stupid boy? Attract vermin?" She'd kicked the papers, scattering them across the dirt floor, before grabbing Leo by the collar of his thin shirt. "You're more trouble than you're worth. Sometimes I wish—" She hadn't finished the sentence, but her eyes, glinting with a cold, hard light, had filled in the terrifying blank. She'd shoved him hard, sending him stumbling back against the rough wooden wall, his head cracking against a protruding nail. Pain, sharp and immediate, had exploded behind his eyes. Now, hours later, the spot on his head throbbed in time with his weak, fluttering pulse. His persistent cough had worsened, each spasm sending jolts of pain through his aching ribs. The night was unusually cold for late spring, a biting wind whistling through the shed's numerous cracks, carrying with it the scent of rain and distant, decaying leaves. He'd pulled his threadbare blanket up to his chin, but the chill seemed to emanate from his very bones. He thought of his parents, his mind conjuring their warm smiles, the feeling of safety in their arms. The memories, once a comfort, now felt like shards of glass, each one a reminder of the abyss that separated his past life from this living nightmare. Hope, that tiny, fragile thing that had flickered with the appearance of the man in the dark car, had all but extinguished. The marble was still out there, he supposed, a lost, lonely speck in the darkness. Just like him, no one would find it. No one would understand. Aunt Carol was in the main house. He could hear the faint, tinny sound of her television, punctuated occasionally by her sharp, joyless laugh. The normalcy of it, the mundane cruelty of her enjoying her evening while he suffered, was a fresh torment. He was nothing to her. Less than nothing. A burden to be barely maintained, a secret to be hidden. He closed his eyes, a single tear escaping and tracing a cold path through the grime on his cheek. Maybe it would be better if he just disappeared. If he just faded away into the cold and the dark. The thought wasn't born of a desire to die, but of an unbearable weariness, an exhaustion that went bone deep. He was so tired of being hungry, of being cold, of being afraid. So incredibly tired. The wind howled a mournful dirge around the corners of the shed. The old wood creaked and groaned, like a ship in a storm-tossed sea. Leo curled himself into the tightest ball he could manage, Sir Reginald clutched in his hand, his only steadfast companion. Each tick of an imaginary clock, each rustle of unseen creatures in the walls, stretched the night into an agonizing, endless expanse. This, he felt with a chilling certainty, was the longest night of his life. And he wasn't sure he would see the morning. The morning air was cool and carried the scent of damp earth from the overnight rain. Arthur Harrison, his jaw set with a grim determination that mirrored the steely grey of the overcast sky, parked his car a little way down from number 217 Sycamore Street. He'd forgone his usual business suit for a more casual but still neat dark jacket and trousers, an attire that felt more appropriate for the grim task ahead. He walked with measured steps up the cracked concrete path to Carol Albright's front door and rang the bell. The wait was short. The door opened a few inches and Carol's suspicious face appeared in the gap. She was still in a faded floral housecoat, her hair uncombed, and her eyes held the puffy, red-rimmed look of someone who hadn't slept well, or perhaps had indulged too much the night before. "What do you want?" she snapped, her voice raspy. The pretense of politeness she'd shown him during their last brief encounter was gone. "Ms. Albright," Mr. Harrison began, his tone even but firm, "I need to speak with you about your nephew, Leo, and I need to see him." Carol's eyes narrowed into malevolent slits. "My nephew is none of your business. He's sleeping. Now get off my property before I call the police for harassment." She tried to slam the door, but Mr. Harrison, anticipating the move, placed a firm hand against it, holding it open. "I'm not leaving until I see him, Miss Albright," he stated, his voice hardening. "If you prefer, I can call the police myself and have them accompany me, but I will see that boy." A flicker of panic, quickly suppressed, crossed Carol's face. "You have no right," she shrieked, her voice rising. "This is my house, my family." "Then let me see him. Prove that he's safe and well, and I'll leave you in peace." Mr. Harrison's gaze was unwavering. He knew, with chilling certainty, that whatever was happening here, peace was the last thing this situation warranted. Seeing his resolve, and perhaps realizing she couldn't easily intimidate him at the front door with potential neighbors watching, Carol's strategy shifted. A venomous fury contorted her features. "Fine," she spat. "You want to see him? I'll show you the little brat." She wrenched the door open violently and stormed through the house, clearly expecting him to follow. He did, his senses on high alert, noting the surprising tidiness of the main house, a stark contrast to the neglect he suspected elsewhere. She didn't lead him to a bedroom. Instead, she marched straight through the kitchen and flung open the back door, heading directly towards the dilapidated shed at the far end of the muddy, unkempt yard. "He's out here," she yelled back over her shoulder, her voice dripping with malice. "Likes his private space, the little delinquent." As they approached the shed, the scene from Mr. Harrison's worst nightmares began to materialize. There, sitting on a rough, weathered wooden bench just outside the shed's partially open door, was a small, shockingly thin boy. It was Leo. His clothes were ragged and dirty, his dark hair matted against his pale forehead. His face, smudged with grime, was a mask of dull resignation and fear. His eyes wide and haunted as he watched their approach. He had his arms wrapped around himself, as if trying to ward off a perpetual chill. Carol, incandescent with rage at being challenged, reached the boy first. She gestured furiously towards him, then spun to face Mr. Harrison as he drew near, her body practically vibrating with aggression. "There!" she screamed, her arm jabbing towards Leo, then swinging to point an accusing finger directly at Mr. Harrison. "You see? He's fine. Just a difficult, ungrateful child who doesn't appreciate anything I do for him. Now, get out!" Her face was a mask of fury, her mouth open in a harsh, accusing yell. Mr. Harrison stopped a few feet away, his gaze taking in the horrific reality. Leo's emaciated frame, the visible tremor in his small hands, the raw-looking scrape on his temple. The shed itself, up close, was even worse than he'd imagined. Rotting planks, a door hanging precariously on one hinge, the pervasive smell of damp and decay. He saw Carol, poised like a cornered animal, ready to defend her squalid kingdom. His heart clenched with a potent mixture of profound sorrow for the boy and a cold, burning anger towards the woman. He raised a hand, palm out, a deliberate calming gesture meant to halt Carol's tirade, to physically and metaphorically stop her. "That's enough, Ms. Albright," he said, his voice low, but carrying an undeniable authority that cut through her screeching. His eyes met Leo's. For a moment, the boy's vacant stare flickered with something unreadable. Confusion, perhaps a dawning, terrified spark of something akin to hope. Carol, however, was far from finished. She started towards Leo, her hand raised, as if to grab or strike him. "Don't you look at him. He's just trying to cause trouble for me, the little liar." "Don't you touch him," Mr. Harrison commanded, his voice now like steel. He took a step forward, placing himself partially between Carol and the boy. He looked directly at Carol, his face a study in controlled outrage, his eyes blazing with a righteous fury that made her recoil slightly. He had seen enough. More than enough. The words, when they came, were not shouted, but they resonated across the wretched yard with the force of a thunderclap, each syllable dripping with condemnation and a fierce, protective anger. "No one," Mr. Harrison declared, his voice ringing with utter conviction, "does this to a child." The declaration hung in the air, absolute and damning. Carol froze, her mouth falling agape, the furious accusations dying on her lips. For the first time, raw, unadulterated fear flashed in her eyes. Leo, who had flinched when Carol moved towards him, slowly lifted his head, his gaze fixed on Mr. Harrison, a silent, unasked question in his haunted eyes. The storm had broken. Mr. Harrison's powerful declaration hung in the damp morning air, silencing even the birds for a moment. Carol Albright stood frozen, her face a ghastly tableau of disbelief and dawning terror. The fight seemed to drain out of her, replaced by a palsied trembling that started in her hands and quickly spread. Without taking his eyes off her, Mr. Harrison reached into his jacket pocket and retrieved his cell phone. His movements were calm, deliberate. "I'm calling the police, Miss Albright, and Child Protective Services. They'll want to hear your explanation for this arrangement." No, you can't," Carol stammered, her voice a mere whisper of its former shriek. He's my nephew. I'm his guardian. It's a misunderstanding. He's a difficult child, I tell you." "Save it for them," Mr. Harrison said coolly, already dialing. He gave the dispatcher their address and a concise, chilling summary of the situation. "Yes, an officer needs to come immediately, and an ambulance for the child would be advisable. He appears severely neglected." While he spoke, his gaze softened as it rested on Leo, who still sat huddled on the bench, watching the incredible scene unfold with wide, unblinking eyes. The boy looked like a startled fawn, poised between flight and an unbearable, fragile hope. It felt like an eternity, but was likely no more than 10 minutes before the wail of sirens, faint at first, then growing rapidly louder, pierced the quiet street. 2 police cruisers and an ambulance pulled up curb, their flashing lights painting strokes of red and blue across the neighboring houses, drawing curious faces to windows. 2 uniformed officers, a man and a woman, approached the backyard, their expressions grimly professional as they took in the scene. Mr. Harrison standing protectively near the shed, a visibly distressed Carol Albright, and the small, frail boy on the bench. "What's going on here?" the male officer asked, his voice calm but authoritative. Mr. Harrison quickly explained, his account clear and damning. Carol, meanwhile, had begun to weep, a theatrical, self-pitying display. "It's not what it looks like. He's lying. I've done my best for him. My very best." The female officer, Officer Evans, knelt gently before Leo, her voice soft. "Hello there," she said, her smile kind. "My name is Maria. What's your name, sweetie?" Leo swallowed hard, his gaze darting from the officer to Mr. Harrison, as if seeking permission. Mr. Harrison gave a small, encouraging nod. "Leo," he whispered, his voice raspy from disuse and his persistent cough. "Well, Leo," Officer Evans continued, "we're here to help you. You're safe now. Are you hungry?" Leo's eyes, huge in his thin face, seemed to grow even wider at the question. He nodded slowly, a profound, childlike honesty in the simple gesture. While Officer Evans spoke with Leo, her partner and Mr. Harrison engaged with Carol. Her protestations of innocence crumbled under the weight of the evidence before them, Leo's condition, the squalor of the shed. Paramedics gently approached Leo, their professional kindness a stark contrast to the years of neglect he had endured. One of them, a woman with warm eyes, offered him a small juice box and a soft blanket, which he clutched as if it were treasure. As the paramedics assessed Leo, noting his malnutrition, dehydration, and the ugly bruise on his head, Mr. Harrison took Officer Miller aside. "Officer," he said in a low voice, "there's something else. I have strong reason to believe Ms. Albright became Leo's guardian to gain control of a significant inheritance left by his parents. Given the boy's condition and her own apparent comfort, I suspect financial malfeasance as well. It's something that should be thoroughly investigated." Officer Miller's expression hardened further. "We'll definitely look into that, sir. Thank you." The process of removing Leo from that terrible place was handled with a gentleness that was almost overwhelming for him. He flinched when a paramedic tried to take his blood pressure, his body conditioned to expect pain from adult touch. But their patient reassurance, Mr. Harrison's steady presence nearby, and Officer Evans's calming words slowly began to penetrate the layers of fear. Wrapped in the soft blanket, sipping the sweet juice, Leo was gently guided towards the ambulance. As he passed the main house, he took what felt like his first real breath of fresh air in years. It was cool, clean, and filled with the scent of damp grass and distant exhaust fumes. The smell of the outside world, a world he was rejoining. It was the scent of freedom. The last thing he saw as they helped him into the ambulance was Aunt Carol, her face pale and streaked with tears, real ones this time, tears of fear and dawning retribution. One of the officers was reading her rights, her hands cuffed behind her back. A small, fierce part of Leo felt a flicker of something that wasn't fear, something almost like satisfaction. But mostly, he just felt tired, and a strange, tremulous lightness he didn't recognize. Mr. Harrison assured Leo he would meet him at the hospital. "You're going to be okay now, Leo," he said, his voice thick with emotion he tried to hide. "This is just the beginning of things getting better." As the ambulance doors closed, shutting out the sight of the grim house and the even grimmer shed, Leo leaned back against the soft stretcher. The siren, a sound that had once signified disaster, now seemed to herald a rescue. He was out. He was safe. The darkness of the shed was behind him, and ahead, though uncertain, was a glimmer of light, a promise of a world where kindness might actually exist. The first breath of freedom was a fragile, precious thing. The fluorescent lights of the hospital felt harsh and alien after the perpetual gloom of the shed. Leo was poked, prodded, and examined with a gentleness that was so foreign it almost made him want to cry. He was severely malnourished, the doctors said, dehydrated and suffering from a lingering respiratory infection. The bruise on his head was superficial, but the invisible scars, they knew, ran much deeper. After a few days of medical stabilization, of warm meals that didn't stop, clean sheets, and voices that didn't hiss or scream. Leo was released into the care of Child Protective Services. He was placed in a specialized foster home with a kind, experienced couple, Sarah and Tom, who understood the patience and sensitivity required for children who had endured trauma. Their house was quiet, filled with soft colors and the comforting aroma of freshly baked cookies. It was, in every way, the antithesis of Aunt Carol's cold, sterile home and the horrors of the shed. The first few weeks were a blur of tentative steps. Leo rarely spoke above a whisper. Sudden noises made him jump, and he'd hoard small pieces of food under his pillow, a habit ingrained by constant hunger. Nightmares were frequent, snatching him back to the cold, dark shed, leaving him trembling and slick with sweat. Sarah would sit with him, her presence a calm anchor in the stormy sea of his fear, until he drifted back to a fitful sleep. Mr. Harrison was a constant. True to his word, he visited Leo regularly, first at the hospital, then at Sarah and Tom's. He didn't push Leo to talk about what happened. Instead, he brought simple picture books, a small sketch pad, and colored pencils, and sometimes just sat with him in comfortable silence. He told Leo stories about his own childhood, funny anecdotes about a mischievous dog he once had, slowly building a bridge of trust, one gentle word at a time. "You know, Leo," Mr. Harrison said one afternoon as they sat on the porch swing at the foster home, the late spring air warm and sweet, "it's okay to be angry about what happened. It's okay to be sad. Those feelings are yours, and they're valid." Leo just nodded, tracing a pattern on the wooden porch with his finger. But he was listening. For so long, his feelings had been dismissed, his suffering ignored. To hear someone acknowledge them, to validate them, was a revelation. A child psychologist, Dr. Ramirez, began working with Leo. She was patient and kind, using play therapy to help him express the emotions he couldn't articulate. Slowly, painstakingly, Leo began to draw pictures. Dark, shadowed sheds, then gradually, tiny specks of color, a tentative sun appearing in a corner. While Leo embarked on his healing journey, the wheels of justice turned for Aunt Carol. The evidence against her was overwhelming. Leo's physical condition, the state of the shed, Mr. Harrison's testimony, and the neighbors' reluctant admissions of her reclusiveness and the boy's prolonged absence. The financial investigation Mr. Harrison had urged also bore bitter fruit. Bank records revealed Carol's systematic embezzlement of Leo's inheritance, funds squandered on personal luxuries, while Leo starved. The community, once perhaps indifferent or politely oblivious, was now galvanized with outrage. The local newspaper picked up the story. Boy, 10, held captive in backyard shed. Aunt charged with abuse, embezzlement. Carol Albright became a pariah. Her carefully constructed facade shattered, revealing the monster beneath. Her trial was swift. Faced with irrefutable evidence and a stony-faced jury, Carol's attempts to portray herself as a victim, a stressed guardian, overwhelmed by a difficult child, fell flat. She was found guilty on multiple counts of child endangerment, neglect, and felony embezzlement. The judge, her voice ringing with unconcealed disgust, sentenced her to a significant prison term, ensuring she could no longer harm Leo or anyone else. She also ordered full restitution of the stolen funds, though recovering them would be a separate, lengthy legal process that Mr. Harrison quietly vowed to oversee on Leo's behalf. When Mr. Harrison told Leo about the verdict, he explained it simply. "Aunt Carol did very bad things, Leo, and now she has to face the consequences. She won't be able to hurt you anymore." Leo listened, his expression unreadable for a long moment. Then he looked up at Mr. Harrison, a flicker of something new in his eyes. "Good," he whispered. It was a small word, but it carried the weight of immense suffering and a dawning sense of justice. Slowly, Leo began to reclaim pieces of his stolen life. He started attending a local school, initially with a dedicated aide, but gradually his confidence grew. He made a tentative friend, a quiet boy named Sam, who shared his love for drawing. He discovered the joy of a public library, the thrill of choosing his own books. He even started to laugh again, small, hesitant sounds at first, then fuller, more joyful expressions that brought tears to Sarah's and Tom's eyes. The path ahead was still long. The wounds, both visible and invisible, would take time to fully mend. But with the unwavering support of Mr. Harrison, the patient care of his foster parents and therapist, and his own quiet, resilient spirit, Leo was no longer just surviving. He was beginning to heal. He was learning to trust, to hope, and to believe that a brighter future, a future his parents had dreamed for him, might still be possible. The stolen pieces of his life were, one by one, being painstakingly reclaimed. 2 years can feel like a lifetime, especially to a child who has navigated the darkest corridors of fear and neglect. For Leo, now 12, those 2 years had been a period of profound transformation, a steady climb from shadow into sunlight. The haunted, hollow-eyed boy from the shed was gone, replaced by a youth who, while still carrying the quiet etchings of his past, now met the world with a budding confidence and an infectious, rediscovered joy. His laughter, once a rare and hesitant sound, now came more easily, especially when he was with Mr. Harrison, or Arthur, as Leo had tentatively begun to call him, at Arthur's gentle insistence. After many months of navigating the complex legal and emotional pathways, Arthur Harrison had officially become Leo's legal guardian, and more importantly, his family. The sprawling, somewhat empty house Arthur owned had gradually transformed into a home, filled with Leo's bright, imaginative drawings taped to the refrigerator, the comforting clutter of his schoolbooks on the kitchen table, and the sound of their shared conversations. The scars, of course, remained. Leo still sometimes woke with a start in the dead of night, the phantom chill of the shed clinging to him. But now, instead of facing the darkness alone, he knew Arthur was just down the hall, a steady, reassuring presence. He knew that a kind word, a comforting hand, was always available. He no longer hoarded food, and his trust in the world, though selectively given, was genuine. His physical health had blossomed under consistent care and nutrition. He'd grown taller, his limbs no longer stick-thin, his cheeks holding a healthy color. He'd discovered a love for baseball, joining a local Little League team, cheered on enthusiastically from the sidelines by Arthur, who, despite his limited knowledge of the sport, quickly became its most ardent student for Leo's sake. He was doing well in school, his natural curiosity finally allowed to flourish, his artistic talents encouraged by both his teachers and Arthur. The funds recovered from Aunt Carol's misuse, meticulously managed by Arthur and a financial advisor, were secure, earmarked for Leo's future education, a future that now seemed boundless with possibilities. The weight of that stolen inheritance, once a symbol of betrayal, had been transformed into a tool for empowerment. Sometimes, looking at Leo as he animatedly recounted his day at school or meticulously worked on a new drawing, Arthur Harrison would feel an overwhelming sense of gratitude and a quiet joy that resonated deeper than any business success he'd ever achieved. Saving Leo hadn't just been about rescuing a child. It had, in many ways, rescued a part of Arthur himself, filling a void he hadn't fully acknowledged until Leo's bright, resilient spirit began to illuminate his life. He'd found a purpose beyond boardrooms and balance sheets, a profound human connection that had become the cornerstone of his world. One crisp autumn afternoon, Leo and Arthur were raking leaves in their yard, the air filled with the earthy scent of fall and the satisfying crunch of golden brown foliage underfoot. Leo, His face flushed with exertion, paused, and looked up at the brilliant blue sky. "Arthur," he said, his voice thoughtful, "do you think Mom and Dad, do you think they know I'm okay now?" Arthur stopped his raking and put a hand on Leo's shoulder, his expression gentle. "I absolutely believe they do, Leo," he said softly. "I think they see you, see how strong and kind and smart you're becoming, and I think they're incredibly proud. Just like I am." A small, genuine smile touched Leo's lips. He leaned into Arthur's side for a moment, a comfortable, unspoken acknowledgement of the bond between them. Then he grabbed a huge pile of leaves and, with a mischievous glint in his eye, tossed them playfully at Arthur, his laughter ringing out, clear and unrestrained. Arthur, feigning outrage, retaliated, and soon the yard was a flurry of flying leaves and joyful shouts, two figures silhouetted against the setting sun, a portrait of a hard-won, deeply cherished peace. The story of the boy in the backyard shed, once a tale of unimaginable cruelty and despair, had become a testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the transformative power of kindness. It was a stark reminder that darkness could, and often did, exist, but also a powerful affirmation that a single, determined light could pierce through it, offering hope and a pathway to healing. Leo's future was no longer a stolen, shadowy thing. It was bright, open, and entirely his to shape. He knew there would be challenges, moments when the echoes of the past might resurface. But he also knew he wasn't alone. He had love, he had security, and he had the unwavering support of a man who had stepped out of the ordinary to do something extraordinary. As dusk settled, they walked back towards the warm glow of the house, their arms companionably around each other's shoulders, leaving behind the raked piles of leaves, symbols, perhaps, of a past that had been confronted, managed, and from which new growth could emerge. A new dawn had broken for Leo, and his future, once a faint, distant hope, was now a vibrant, tangible reality, shining brightly before him. And that brings us to the end of Leo's journey. Thank you all so much for joining us and for sharing in this story of hope and resilience. Your support means the world. We hope this story touched your heart and served as a reminder of the strength of the human spirit and the incredible impact a little kindness can have. Until next time, please take good care of yourselves and each other. Wishing you all health, happiness, and many wonderful moments ahead. Stay safe, and we'll see you soon.